You guys can have a seat, and I was just told actually that we do have a bit more Kid Zone volunteers, so the normal Kid Zone crowd can head to Kid Zone if you guys want to. Up to first grade. Oh, I totally butchered. Sorry. He told me that earlier, and then he said, hey, make sure, and I thought he said it differently. I totally butchered that. Cut that off the record. If you are up to first grade, head to Kid Zone. Otherwise, hang out with us and talk about judgment. Oh, man. Welcome, everybody. Glad to see everybody here today. Caleb is still out on paternity leave, hanging out with his new kid, so he'll be back in a couple weeks. Super pumped about little Charlie. So, man, things have been really good so far. Even just going through this sermon series has been really cool, I think, being able to see just kind of a different aspect of who God is. So we are smack dab in the middle of this sermon series called Not So Famous Amos, talking about the minor prophet of Amos, who at his time was not so famous because he just told the people really hard news that was true, that was good, that was righteous, that was from God, but it was just kind of hard to take in that. So last week we heard John talk about Amos, and he introed who Amos is, and he's a fig tree farmer turned prophet. And I know we all know so many fig tree farmers, so it's hard to imagine them becoming a prophet, but no, he's just a regular dude. Whenever I think of a fig Newton. I really don't know what a fig even looks like. I should Google that. But you have one in your car? That's awesome. All right, frozen figs, if anyone wants. Wrap them with bacon? Okay. So Amos was a fig tree farmer, and all of you guys totally understand that in a way that I thought I was being sarcastic, but you guys get. So he turned into a prophet, and basically he lived at a time where Israel was divided into these two kingdoms, and you've got the northern Israel and then southern Judah. And Amos lived right near the border, just south in the Judah region, and honestly, there were just a lot of issues going on at that time. And last week, we heard John talk about all those issues, and if you draw kind of a circle around where they are, like all those cities are in a circle around them. And basically, he's showing, like, look, all of this destruction, all of this sin, all of this just disgusting stuff, it is literally surrounding us all around. So we've got Damascus, who are doing these brutal military tactics. We have Gaza and Tyre, who are involved in slavery. Edom is murdering people. Ammon, there's genocide. In Moab, there's cruelty towards Edom. In Judah, there's rejecting the law of God. In Israel, there's bribery, greed, adultery, immorality, selfishness, ingratitude, drunkenness, and rejecting God's revelation. That is a messed up area. And honestly, I just stepped on my shoelace, sorry. Honestly, like if you think about all those different things, I don't know that there's one of those that doesn't apply to somewhere in the world today. And most of those apply to us in our own backyard. There's just a lot of just rampant sin that people just don't care about. And in this time, Amos lived under the reign of King Jeroboam II. And he was a guy who was really good militarily. Like he was really good at like leading his people from a military standpoint and taking ground and gaining wealth, but he just didn't care about God's rules. He didn't care about what had been set up and what the kingdom was that he was kind of taking over here. And God used Amos to be the mouthpiece to speak into that. And we heard last week how John spoke about like God speaking into the injustices and saying, these are not okay, these grieve my heart, they're ungodly, they're not right. And now we see Amos start to, continue the rebuke of this and pointing out these different issues. And we're picking up here in chapter 6, where he essentially tells the Jewish people, like, you're ignoring all of this sin. And I don't have time to really go deep into Amos 6 here, but I did just want to read a couple kind of excerpts here. Amos 6:1 says, "Woe to you who are complacent in Zion, and to you who feel secure on Mount Samaria, you notable men of the foremost nation to whom the people of Israel come." In other words, he's saying, I'm warning you, like you people are sitting in complacency and you're just in opulence and you don't care about what's happening around you. Also, like we said earlier, we have a Church Center app. You can follow along with the notes there if you want to go in Church Center and click app or sermon notes. We've got them on the screen too. So we continue on here in verse 4. It says, "You lie on beds adorned with ivory and lounge on your couches. You dine on choice lambs and fatted calves. You strum away on your harps like David and improvise on musical instruments. You drink wine by the bowlful and use the finest lotions, but you do not grieve over the ruin of Joseph." And Joseph here is talking about the people of God. "Therefore, you will be among the first to go into exile. Your feasting and your lounging will end." Now, I want to point out here, this is a bit of a downer of a sermon. It's heavy stuff. But he's not getting on to them for good meat, nice beds, and killer harp solos. That's not the point here, okay? He's getting on to them because they are so wrapped up in those things that they are ignoring the destruction around them. He's furious with them for getting so wrapped up in the things that are just like taking time and taking energy that they are completely missing the fact that all of this death and destruction is happening around them, and they just don't care. Like they're just burying their head in the sand and being like, "I'm happy. Things are good for me." And like for us, like they're so caught up in their Netflix shows, like the new show that just came out. They're so caught up in the election. They're so caught up in the trips that they're taking. They're so caught up in that reel that they saw on Instagram that they're sharing. They're so caught up in all of the stuff that's not bad, but it's horrible when it's all we can focus on and we miss the point. We miss what's really happening. Like we get so caught up in opulence that we forget destruction is all around us. And I want to point out, like none of those things are bad. There's some great shows on Netflix. Like it's fun to be sick and binge watch something. But if that is your whole life and you're missing everything around it, we are completely missing the point. And he actually kind of goes back into that a little bit more in a minute. He talks about how how guilty they are. Like I love this, Amos 6:12. He said, "You've turned justice into poison and the fruit of righteousness into bitterness." So here's what that means. Leave that up, the first part of that up on the screen. Or do horses run on rocky crag? No. So we're in the middle there. You've turned justice into poison and the fruit of righteousness into bitterness. What he's saying is, in the past, like he has blessed these people. Like this is the people of Jacob. That's why he keeps referring them to him that way. He's saying, because of your righteousness in the past, you have been blessed. Now, you're so focused on the blessing that you are not at all righteous and you don't deserve it anymore. He's saying, you've done well, and now the good things that came out of that have completely destroyed you. It's turned into bitterness. And man, like that's a hard thing to hear. And I think we have to ask ourselves today, like, am I guilty of that? Because I know there were times in my life 10, 15 years ago where I was genuinely like, I'd look at Autumn and I'd be like, I don't know where our next meal's coming from. Do you? Nope. Well, glad I have storage. Like, I've got, I don't know about you, you're screwed, but like, no. There were times where I was begging God, like, please take care of tomorrow. I don't know what tomorrow brings. And then later in our lives, when things are okay, or at a different time in our lives when we've received that blessing, we forgot the fact that we even prayed the prayer. We forgot that God even came through in that before, and that's why we're okay. We completely miss God in the midst of it, and we start worshiping the thing he gave us because we were worshiping him before. And that's what these people are going through. And like that's a hard thing for us to hear because we do this. And his response to that is Amos 6:8. I abhor the pride of Jacob. Abhor is not a word we use very often. Like that is hatred to the umpteenth level. I abhor the pride of Jacob, and I detest his fortress. I will deliver up the city and everything in it. Now, it's easy for us to hear this and just feel like God is completely irrational, that he's against his people, that he just wants them to die. But what I think of when I hear this, I've got a friend that I'm thinking of one, honestly, when I wrote this, I was thinking of a friend dealing with this, but I probably have like 10 friends dealing with this. But this guy I'm thinking of is this guy whose son is grown up, and he loves his son. He cares deeply about his son, but his son's a cocaine addict. And the amount of hatred that that man has for cocaine is unreal. Like to a point where I don't even get it. Like I don't understand it because I have never seen something like that take my son, and I never will, hopefully. I'm going to speak that now. I never will. But the amount of hatred that he has for that drug that is destroying his son's life is abhorring that thing. And what he's saying here is, I abhor the pride of Jacob. I detest his fortresses. It's not that God is against his people. It's that God is looking at that perfect life they built up around themselves, and he's saying, I hate that thing that has ripped them away from me. I hate that thing that they built these walls thinking, let's keep us safe from our enemies, but it actually kept them from me. And God hates the fact that this is happening. And we've done that, and we see that on a day-to-day. But God here is saying, you've got generations of this. I've got 10 years where God has blessed me, and I've gotten stuck on the blessings. But imagine generation after generation after generation where they have completely even forgot where it came from. They've completely forgotten that God was behind this. But in the midst of that hatred, in the midst of that wrath and that judgment, we also see the same thing we talked about last week that John kept pointing out. Amos 5:4, 5:6, and 5:14 say, seek the Lord and live. There's this constant invitation, this constant draw to come to me, seek me, and live. There's a way out of this. I think of my friend, looking at his son who probably thinks he hates him because of this coke thing. But actually he's saying, look, seek me and live. Get out of this and I can show you something else. And God is just desperately trying to rip his people out of destruction because he doesn't want them to be destroyed. That's not what he wants. And I think we see two different sides of God here. And this honestly, this side we're talking about today is one that we don't like to talk about in current day America. The wrath side, the judgment side, the righteousness side, we know it's there, but we don't talk about it. That's like the 1970s fire and brimstone stuff, and we're we left that behind. We now say it differently. But it's still there, right? That's who God is. And I think we make the dire mistake of essentially spiritually castrating God and taking the power out and saying, you are not the mighty God you used to be. You are not this powerful God. We look at him he's this passive, weak, disinterested sky genie where if we ask the right thing in the right way, we get it. And that's not who he is. And I think we today still make the dire mistake that they made back then where they're things are good. For the most part, things are good. And I'll ask God for slightly better, but things are pretty good. And we forget about the fact that our God still has just as much wrath, just as much power, and just as much hatred for our sin today as he did then. Now, he literally had generation after generation after generation, thousands of years, thousands and thousands of years of hating the sin of his people and destroying his people because of that sin to try to bring them into life again. And I really believe, I think we see in Scripture that he so hated doing that he was I have to destroy this once and for all. And that's where we get Jesus. Jesus coming and paying the price for our sin was a final end to all of this. Was a final, the final thing where he's I can't keep going through this pain. I can't keep seeing my kids who I desperately love falling into this and having to wipe the sin away from them, and it destroys them in the process. They get hurt in the process, and I just want to fix that. And that's what we see in the person of Jesus. That's what we see in the fact that God finally paid the price once and for all so that every single one of us don't have to look at this the same. And I think that's why we sometimes so wrongly see God as this God who's not capable of wrath anymore. He's still capable of it, but it's not pointed at us anymore because he took it on himself. Gosh, that is a sobering thing. That for every single one of us here today who say yes to Jesus and accept that free gift of salvation, accept that relationship, it literally blocks us from this. It blocks us from the fire, the torment, the starvation, all of this stuff. Because God is equal parts righteousness and judgment over here and grace and love over here. Like, it's all the same. And I think, man, even just looking at this, I can't even imagine what Amos was thinking, because he didn't know Jesus was coming the way he did. Like, he knew there was a Messiah, he knew there was some relief, but he didn't know what it looked like. And for me, reading this, like, I am so comforted in knowing that, like, it's different for us. But for them, they're still in this. And we go from him saying through Amos to these people, look, this has got to stop, to here's what I'm going to do about it. Here's the actual judgment. And we get into that at the beginning of chapter 7. So Amos 7, verse 1, this is what it says. It says, this is what the sovereign Lord showed me in this vision. He was preparing swarms of locusts after the king's share had been harvested, and just as the late crops were coming up, when they had stripped the land clean, I cried out, sovereign Lord, forgive. How can Jacob survive? He is so small. So the Lord relented. This will not happen, the Lord said. So just to kind of bring this into perspective here, God says, I'm going to send locusts to destroy them. Now, when we hear locusts today, I think we're just like, man, grab the raid. You know, like, locusts, that sounds annoying. I would hate to have bugs in my house, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about swarms of locusts that eat all the food. And imagine the next day waking up and being like, there is nothing to eat. Like, imagine what our country would be like tomorrow with mass starvation where no one had anything. That's a level of destruction that we have not seen in our lifetimes. It exists in other places in the world, but we have not seen this firsthand. And Amos is caring so deeply for his people that he thinks about the ramifications of that, and he's like, God, please no. Please no. Like, Jacob, our country, is so fragile. We're so small. We won't even make it through that. Please, God, don't do that. And God says, okay. So then another vision. Verse 4, this is what the sovereign Lord showed me. The sovereign Lord was calling for judgment by fire. It dried up the great deep and it devoured the land. And then I cried out, sovereign Lord, I beg you, stop. How can Jacob survive? He's so small. So the Lord relented. This will not happen either. So God steps up the way he does it. Like, starvation is bad, but just like fire, like, I don't know about you, but like, I've felt that way before. I'm like, just burn it down, you know? Like, that's literally where God goes. He's like, we're going to dry up the water, gone, and all the land torched. Nothing left, just death, destruction. Like, that's where God goes because he is so disgusted with the sin. And Amos again says, God, please, no. Please don't do that. Like, look at your people. They're so small, they won't make it. They're not strong enough for this. Please don't do it. So God again says, okay. So twice, God says what he's going to do. And this is not just a vision for Amos to like feel good about hearing God. Like, this is God's plan. And he heard Amos's voice and he said, okay, I won't do it. And I just want to bring that to today for us. Like, what would that be like for us? Because Amos got a warning, you know? Amos could have been like, all right, time to pack my bags. Fire's coming, you know? Like, okay, guess I'm going to Tyre. Murders are the least, yeah, we'll go there, you know? Like, at least they don't have genocide. Like, no, he hears this, and his thought is, God, no, please, save my people. And imagine what it would be like if God came to you today and said, Indianapolis is disgusting. Indianapolis is not what I meant it to be. The city is broken. And what if he looked at you and he said, did you know there are 208 homicides in 2024? That's gross. I'm done with it. And the majority of this city laughs in the face of biblical sexuality. Not okay. I'm done. And the women and children are being bought and sold into sexual slavery in your neighborhood, right here. I'm disgusted. The head of the teachers union was embezzling money. Multiple lawmakers have been arrested for corruption and taking bribes. 3,000 people a year die of drug overdoses in our city. There are more foster kids per capita than almost any city in the U.S. here. More fatherless children. Not to mention the fact that much of this city calls my followers lunatics, bigots, liars, and thieves simply because they follow me. I'm done. What if he told you that? Because that's all 100% true. Would you hear that and say, man, I'm going to be like King Jeroboam and my life's okay. I'm just going to ignore it. And if he burns it, well, at least I'll have a cushy bed to burn with him. Or would you just be like, all right, God, yeah, it's kind of going to hell. Like, literally. I guess just do what you want to do. Or would you intercess on behalf of your people? Your people that live nothing like you, by the way. Amos was not one of these people, but he was one of the people. So what are we going to do about it? Like that just struck me. Because I think a lot of times we look out at the city that we're in, we look out at the broken people around us, and we look at it like it's an us versus them, but it should be an us for them thing. We should be begging God to not have the judgment that he should have. Say, God, give us one more shot. Let's fix this thing. Like, that's the heart that I think he had. And I want to point out here that, like, we've got 5.5, 6 chapters up to this point where God is calling out sin, this is wrong, you can't do this, you've got to stop this. But the straw that breaks the camel's back, the thing that shifts it from warning and this is not okay to here's what I'm going to do is apathy. The thing that gets him to say, I'm done with this, is that my own people don't care. They're not looking at it. My own people are complacent in this. That's the thing that kills him here. That's the thing where he's like, I'm done. Because the people that are supposed to be following him stop being disgusted with the sin around them. And they started seeing it like it was just normal. And they started thinking, well, what's God going to do about it? It's not me. Guys, we cannot get to the point where we stop being disgusted by sin. We can't get to the point where we just see it and we're like, yeah, that's normal. That's what happens. Of course there's people going through all this. Like we can't be okay with sex before marriage just because everyone does it. And we just eat it up like it's nothing. Like we should be disgusted by that because he is. And we can't just be okay with human trafficking because like it happens more in other places. And you know what actually is that? Like, no, we should be disgusted by this. We can't just write off drug use because we pass 10 druggies on the corner on the way here. Like this should disgust us. We should rip people out of that reality because they are stuck in bondage they can't get out of. And we can't just write off the crap that we see on social media that we're like, well, it's not technically porn, so like it's probably fine. I'm on the line. Like, no, it's porn. Like the word porneia or the word porn comes from the Greek word porneia in the Bible that means sexual immorality. So if God would look at that and say it is sexually immoral, it's porn. We should be disgusted by that. When we look at the people who are greedy and flaunting wealth, and we're like, well, you know, it's just rap culture. No, we should be disgusted by that. We should be disgusted by the fact that it has gone so far from God's heart. And we look at the pride and the arrogance of businessmen and say, well, they're good at business. That's what it takes. Like, no, we should be disgusted by that. Across the board, there are so many of these things that we should be disgusted by. And the time where God comes down on his people is when they stop caring about it. Not that they weren't affected by it for generations before that. The time that he doles out his judgment is when they're like, it is what it is. And I think if there is anything that can be held against the church today, against the Western church in the world today, it's this. That we insulate ourselves from sin instead of being disgusted by it. And we build little fortresses around our kids and we say, just don't look at that, instead of teaching them to be disgusted by it. Instead of teaching them that this is what is destroying all of it and what's taking us away from God. And yes, we need to be people who make sure to invest in purity and protect innocence. But also, we need to be people that look out and say, this is what's happening, and it's gross. And God, because of that, comes down on them in judgment. And most of chapter 6 and 7 are God saying what he's going to do as a result of all this. And there's some pretty rough stuff. Super pumped that Cody gave me this sermon as he planned out this series. But here's some of the things that we see. Amos 8:7 says, "The Lord has sworn by himself, the pride of Jacob, I will never forget anything they have done." Chapter 8, verse 10, "I will turn your religious festivals into mourning and all your singing into weeping." Amos 8:11, "I'll send a famine through the land, not a famine of food or thirst for water, but a famine of hearing the words of the Lord." If that one doesn't hit you the hardest, you need to spend more time with Jesus. That's the worst of all of them. Amos 9:1, "Strike the tops of the pillars so that the thresholds shake. Bring them down on the heads of all the people. Those who are left I will kill with the sword. Not one will get away. None will escape." Can I just say, God is livid with his people here. And it is a righteous and godly anger. And again, we don't like to talk about this side of it. Luckily, we have Jesus, so we don't need to talk about this side of it as much. But the same feeling that got God to do this stuff is the same thing that made him send Jesus so that we wouldn't have this on our heads. Man, I don't know about you, but that makes the grace so much sweeter, knowing that this is what I deserve. And I said he's livid with his people, but that's not even a good enough word for this, right? I cannot think of a word in the English language that really portrays this. The closest thing I can think of to lighten the mood a little bit is the conversation Liam Neeson has in the movie Taken. Have you guys seen that movie where his daughter is taken into human trafficking, and he picks up the phone and he just has this blood-curdling, terrifying conversation with them, and he talks about how he has this particular set of skills, and and he goes into this whole thing and he says, "If you let my daughter go now, that'll be the end of it." That's what he said earlier, "Come to me." But he said, "There's skills that make me a nightmare for people like you. I will look for you. Sorry, if you let her go, I will not look for you. I will not pursue you. But if you don't, I will look for you. I will find you, and I will kill you." And there's this amount of terror that comes in your heart when you hear a dad going after his daughter, nothing on earth is stopping me from this. If I had that conversation, I'd be I have very little skills, but I will try to find you. And then justice will happen if I can find you. Okay. But God is this incredible dad in this, who looks at his kids. It's like that dad looking at his son who's a coke addict and saying, "Look, I cannot even express to you how much I hate this thing that is destroying you. Amen. But you, I deeply and desperately love." And man, that is the gospel. That God said, "You deserve all of this, but instead, I'm going to take the punishment for it, so you don't have to have that." And he rescued us. Amen. But this is what he ends with here in this section. Amos 9:7-10. There's a lot of destruction and a little bit of hope. He says, "Are not you Israelites the same to me as the Cushites, declares the Lord? Did I not bring Israel up from Egypt, the Philistines from Caphtor, and the Armenians from Kir? Surely the eyes of the sovereign Lord are on the sinful kingdom. I will destroy it from the face of the earth." And here's the hope. "Yet I will not totally destroy the descendants of Jacob, declares the Lord. I will give the command, and I will shake the people of Israel among all the nations as grain is shaken in a sieve, and not a pebble will reach the ground. All the sinners among my people will die by the sword, and all those who say disaster will not overtake or meet us. All the people who are arrogant and saying, I'm going to be fine, heaven's going to be, or hell's going to be fantastic because I'll be partying with my friends. God's like, man, I can't save you from that. But in the middle, I will not totally destroy the descendants of Jacob. And next week, Dakota gets to have the fun sermon where things kind of come together in Dakota, right? Yeah. Okay. Kristen looked confused. I was like, it might be me. I don't know. No. Next week, Dakota gets to bring kind of the fun ending to this that's at least a little bit upbeat. But I want us to remember this judgment in the middle. I want us to remember the weightiness that we feel right now, because that is what makes Jesus so unbelievable. That is what makes the fact that he took that from us and put it on himself. That's what makes it so unbelievable. Like, God is so good. So I think, again, there's a few things that I hit on that I want to point out. These are all on that connection card if you want to pull them up. Actually, just go ahead and pull out the card. You can also do it on the Church Center app. There's a digital one on there. The things I want to leave you with are this. A lot of times we have these next steps on here, and they're like, I'm going to pray twice this week, and it's super easy. Check the box. This is not that. These are kind of hard. These are heavy things. And as 9/10 of the room comes up on this stage, love our worship team. I want to point out a couple of these things. The first one is I realize that judgment is a reality, and I need to stop treating God like he's powerless. Guys, I don't think there's a single one of us in this room who don't have this problem. I think all of us look at God because of his grace and his mercy, and we're like, yeah, that's not who you are anymore. Like, that's still who he is. The righteousness, the truth, the justice is still very much who he is, but he paid the price for it already. And we should not be so immature to think that the other side is gone because of Jesus. The other side is paid for because of Jesus. The second thing here is I'll strive for righteousness in my own life and not be angry at God for having a standard that he set. Now, we in this world today have a major problem with thinking that we get to decide everything, thinking that we get to be in control, we get to decide what's right and wrong, and it's just not true. And in the same way, like I keep coming back to my friend whose son is a coke addict, he's looking at him and saying, look, this stuff is destroying you. That's why it's wrong. You think it's great. You think it's fun. You think it's the best thing you've ever done. It's not. It is destruction. And God, in setting these rules, is not punishing us. He's keeping us from destruction. He's keeping us from this absolutely disgusting mess that we can get ourselves in. He sets the rules. And the third thing here is I'd ask you to join me in praying for God's mercy of the people of Indianapolis. Because everything I said earlier about our city is 100% true. But if I found out today that God was going to destroy this city because of the sin, I would beg him not to, because we love it so much. And I'd encourage you, fall in love with our city, fall in love with our nation, and beg God to move on our behalf and help us stay disgusted by the sin. So God, that's my prayer. I don't even know how to handle half of this stuff that I read in the Old Testament, because it doesn't make sense to us. In the same way that somebody in the Old Testament being told about Jesus, it just wouldn't fully make sense. When we look at the Old Testament, it just doesn't fully make sense to us because we've lived under that grace our whole lives. Because we've had mercy extended to us since minute one of being alive. Since there was breath in our lungs, you wanted to redeem it. Thank you that you do that, Lord Jesus, for us. But help us see that you are not some hippie sky genie who just gives us whatever we want. You are a loving and devoted Father who doesn't want to see us perish and doesn't want to see us fall under this judgment and under all this hurt. Lord, thank you that when we call your name, you show up. Thank you that when we confess that you are Lord, and believe that God raised you from the dead, that we're saved. Thank you that that's the reality we live in. But don't ever let us stop being disgusted by sin. Please don't ever let us think that it's the norm that this stuff happens around us. Lord, break us for what breaks you. Change us here today, Lord Jesus, please.